Off the coast of the United States, there's an island that no civilian is allowed to visit. No tourists, no journalists, no historians. Trying to land there without permission is a federal crime. This island belongs to the U.S. government, and for decades, it has remained completely off-limits. Boats are warned away. Aircraft avoid the airspace. Even the nearby waters are constantly monitored. Most Americans have no idea it even exists, and that's exactly how it was designed. From above, the island looks quiet, isolated, almost empty. But that silence hides a story the government never wanted told. Because this island wasn't closed for nature preservation, or because it's a pristine reserve. It was closed because of what happened there. So, why did the government need an island in the first place? To understand that, we have to go back to the early 20th century. The United States was entering a new era of warfare. World War I had changed everything. Combat was no longer just about soldiers on the battlefield. It was about chemicals, gases, diseases, and invisible threats that could wipe out entire populations. Military planners were terrified that future wars would be even worse. They needed places to experiment, places where mistakes wouldn't be seen, places where failures could be buried. They needed places where secrecy could be absolute. The mainland was simply too populated. There were too many eyes, too many risks of a disaster spreading. Islands were the perfect solution. Remote, controllable, easy to isolate. And so, the government quietly began searching for islands it could fully control. This particular island met every single requirement. It was isolated, yet still within U.S. territory. It was far from major cities, easy to guard, and difficult to access without being detected. Once the decision was made, it was swift. The island was placed under federal authority, and access was restricted almost immediately. Any civilian activity nearby was discouraged or completely shut down. Official explanations were deliberately vague. People were told it was for military use, training exercises, or that it was a matter of national security. Nothing more was offered. And with that, the lockdown began. Within a short time, the island vanished from public discussion. Maps were altered to make it less conspicuous. Travel routes were adjusted around it. Records were classified. Warning signs appeared in the surrounding waters, and patrol boats enforced the perimeter. Anyone who came too close was turned away, no questions asked. Over time, the enforcement became even stricter. What had once been just another island was now a forbidden zone. Whatever was happening there, the government didn't want any witnesses. Secrecy became official policy. Everyone involved with the island, from military personnel to scientists and support staff, had to sign strict secrecy agreements. Talking about their work there, even to their own family, could land them in prison. Most workers weren't even told the full purpose of their tasks. They simply followed instructions, completing one small piece of a much larger, darker puzzle, without ever knowing the big picture. Secrecy wasn't just encouraged. It was ruthlessly enforced. You might wonder, why didn't anyone ask questions? You have to remember the context of the time. The country was at war, or recovering from one, or heading into another. Fear was everywhere. Patriotism was the ultimate justification. If the government declared something was necessary for national security, that was the end of the conversation. And so, the island remained sealed off. Whatever was happening there stayed hidden. For a while. Years passed. Then, whispers began to surface. Rumors of unusual security measures. Talk of strange equipment shipments seen at night. Personnel rotations that made no sense. But more disturbingly, some workers returned from the island with unexplained, severe health problems. Others came back so traumatized, they refused to talk about their time there at all. But without proof, rumors were just rumors. The island remained closed, and the truth stayed buried, because what the government was doing on that island wasn't just classified. It was dangerous. And the secrets they were hiding were about to get much, much worse. For years, the U.S. government insisted the island posed no danger. They told the public it was simply restricted for military purposes, a routine training ground. But declassified documents, whispered stories from former personnel, and years of investigative work have painted a very different and much darker picture. Because this island wasn't just for training. It was a laboratory for experiments the government didn't dare conduct on the mainland. This is part 2 of the story of America's Forbidden Island. So, what exactly was being tested behind those barbed wire fences and warning signs? We're not talking about simple weapons drills. We're talking about substances considered far too dangerous for public exposure. Think chemical agents, biological materials, and highly experimental weapon systems. These weren't just theoretical studies in a lab. They were real-world tests. Scientists working in secret would release these substances into controlled environments on the island. They wanted to see how they behaved in the wild. How far would they spread? How long would they linger in the air, the soil, the water? And most chillingly, how deadly could they be? To gather this data, animals were often used. They were exposed to these agents, and the effects were meticulously documented. The soil and water across the island were constantly monitored. Every data point was collected and classified. But as you can imagine, when you're dealing with such volatile materials, sometimes things go horribly wrong. Containment is never a guarantee. And on this island, it failed. Not every test stayed neatly within its designated zone. A sudden shift in the wind could carry an aerosolized agent for miles. A piece of equipment could malfunction at the worst possible moment. A safety protocol, designed to be foolproof, could be overlooked in the rush to get results. And when these failures happened, contamination spread. It seeped into the ground, it was carried by the rain into the streams, and it settled over areas that were supposed to be safe. Back then, the long-term environmental consequences of these actions were poorly understood. Or maybe they were just ignored entirely. The primary mission wasn't to protect the island's ecosystem. It was to gather data, no matter the cost. Now, let's talk about the human impact. Thousands of military personnel were stationed on this island over the years. They were young, they were dedicated, and they trusted the system to protect them. Many were never fully informed about the true nature of the materials they were handling, or the tests being conducted just over the next hill. They did their jobs, believing they were serving their country in a conventional way. Years later, sometimes even decades after their service, some of these veterans began to develop serious and unexplainable health problems. We're talking about aggressive respiratory illnesses, chronic skin disorders, and debilitating neurological symptoms. When they sought answers, they hit a brick wall. Trying to prove a connection between their illness and their time on the island was nearly impossible. The records of what they were exposed to were classified. Exposure logs were often incomplete or had mysteriously vanished. Without that documentation, there could be no accountability. Families asked questions, but they were met with silence and denial. The system that was supposed to protect them had now abandoned them. Eventually, the rumors and the growing number of sick veterans became too loud to ignore. The evidence was mounting, and it all pointed to one unavoidable conclusion. The island was contaminated. It was dangerously toxic. Admitting this truth publicly would have been a disaster. It would have raised profound ethical questions about the government's responsibility to its own soldiers and the environment. It would have opened the door to endless lawsuits. So, the government chose another path. Not transparency, but permanent closure. The island was officially reclassified as hazardous. Vague announcements were made about cleanup efforts, but anyone with knowledge of the materials used knew that a full decontamination was impossible. Some of these chemical and biological agents don't just disappear. They don't break down over a few years. They persist in the soil. They contaminate the groundwater. They remain toxic for decades, even centuries. The closure wasn't just a temporary measure. It was an admission that the damage was permanent. The only way to manage the problem was to lock it away and throw away the key. And that brings us to today. Why is this island still completely off limits to civilians? Not temporarily. Not as a simple precaution. It is closed indefinitely. Certain areas of the island are still considered acutely unsafe for human presence without full-body protective gear. Other zones are continuously monitored for radiation and chemical signatures, but no one ever enters them. Opening the island to the public, or even to independent researchers, would invite scrutiny. And that scrutiny could uncover truths that the government has spent decades trying to keep buried. It's easier to keep the gates locked. It's important to understand that this island isn't some bizarre, isolated case. Throughout the Cold War era, secret experiments were conducted in remote locations all across the United States, often without public knowledge or consent. This island is simply one of the most extreme and enduring examples. It's a place so contaminated, both physically by toxic agents and historically by the secrets it holds, that the only solution the government could come up with was total and permanent isolation. So today, the island sits silently in the water. No visitors, no public explanations, no real transparency. Nature is slowly reclaiming parts of it. Trees grow over old concrete bunkers, and vines cover rusted fences. But beneath that green surface, the past remains untouched, preserved in the soil and in the classified files that are still locked away. As long as the island stays closed, the full story of what happened there, the full extent of the contamination, and the full human cost may never be known. Some questions, it seems, are not meant to be answered, and that's why you can't visit. It's not because there's nothing to see. It's because there is far too much history, too many mistakes, and too many secrets. Some places aren't meant to be explored. They are meant to stay buried, serving as a silent monument to a history we are not allowed to know. Thanks for watching. If this story fascinated you, make sure to follow for more deep dives into the world's hidden places.